Hey there, Nation. Welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with another episode of Cheap Shots. And this is episode number 26. And on this episode, we're going to show you how to cheaply and quickly paint up a Godsworn Hunt Warband from the Warhammer Underworlds Shadespire property that's by Games Workshop on this one. So as you can see here, this is what the end result will look like by the time we get done using the Cheapskate method for painting up this warband. And we're not really playing Shadespire so much on my channel. It's just that I have a friend of mine who plays a Norse Marauders warband for our Mordheim campaign that we have for Shadows over Mordheim, and she's going to need additional models inside of her warband. So she purchased this Godsworn Hunt warband because it kind of matched the Untamed Beast that she uses for her Norse Marauders, and I painted it up for her so that way she can use it for her campaign. So we're going to show you exactly how we go through the painting of this warband step by step. We'll show you exactly what paints we used, what techniques we used as well, and at the end of it we'll show you how you can save over $100 on the savings by using the Cheapskate method to paint this up. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this video on a roll. Alright, so step number one, the first thing you have to do, of course, is prime the miniatures. And the prime that we're going to use this time is Rust-Oleum. It's called American Accents, is the name of the series. It's a 2X Ultra Cover Flat White Primer. Bonds to plastic, as you see here. Now, usually I used to use Color Place flat white spray paint in order to prime my miniatures. The reason why I stopped using that product, unfortunately, is because Walmart stopped selling it, and I can't find it anywhere. I try to look up online on Amazon, at Lowe's, Home Depot. Nobody sells this stuff anymore because apparently Rust-Oleum is getting rid of that line. So unfortunately, this is the closest to the cheapest white spray paint I could find. It's basically $3.99 per can of this stuff. So, which is kind of sad because Color Place used to be 98 cents. But, them's the breaks, I guess. So the first thing you gotta do, of course, is grab a can of this stuff and basically just do a really quick primer job on the entirety of your warband, so that way you have a good layer to work off of. The white kind of helps to add some brightness to your miniature, and at the same time helps the acrylic paint to stick to it as well. Now, of course, once you're done priming the miniatures, the next thing you need to do, of course, is base coat the flesh. Now, a lot of these Godsworn hunters, they got a lot of bare skin being exposed because they look like barbarians from the north, I guess. So because of that, they do have a lot of skins, and because of that, that's the main color scheme you're going to use. Now, I wanted to go with more of like a darker kind of skin tone than a pale skin tone on this one. So because of that, the base color I used for all the flesh was Nutmeg Brown. It's made by Apple Barrel Paint. It's about 59 milliliters or 2 fluid ounces. It runs you about 50 cents at your local Walmart. And of course, all I did is I just painted all the flesh tones with the Nutmeg Brown. I painted all the exposed skin for the entirety of the warband is what I ended up doing for that one. And of course, you should put 2 coats of this stuff onto your miniature, and then you have a nice solid base coat to work off of for the flesh. And you gotta do exactly the same thing with gray this time. As you can see here, I did the entire warband up. I painted up their entire skin tone with nutmeg. However, in this warband, there's also like a warhound that's also in this unit as well. So because of that, I'm gonna show you how to paint that guy up too. And what I did is I just did, of course, 2 thin layers of gray paint is what I used. I used Anita's acrylic paint. You can find at your local Hobby Lobby. It's 2 fluid ounces. Runs you about 65 cents per tube. And I just put 2 thin coats directly onto the warhound to make it look a little bit different. And that makes up step number 3 on this one. So for step number 4, the next step, of course, is the technique you got to use is a dry brush on this one. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with dry brushing, what you do with the dry brushing is you take a, densely bristled brush, you dip it in the color that you need, and then of course you just wipe off the excess onto like a piece of paper towel or a towel of some sort until you have barely any paint left over, and then of course you just brush it directly over the top of the miniature. Now the reason why you do this is because the dry brushing catches all the raised surfaces and adds some, catches the highlights for your miniature. So for the Godsworn Hunt Warband, for all the human characters anyways, I use Flesh by Apple Barrel Paint. Once again, 50-cent tube. Get it from your local Walmart. And the reason why is that way you can catch some of the musculature on the miniatures and adds a little bit more depth as well as highlight to it. So the nutmeg brown stays in the recesses while the flesh catches the highlights and gives it like a nice kind of like warm tone to it as well. And at the same time, still maintaining that dark flesh color that we're looking for this warband. And of course, you do exactly the same technique using granite gray there on the right hand side for the warhound. Make sure that you do a nice dry brush job on that one, so that way it has 3-dimensionality tones. So the darker grays in the recesses of the warhound, while the granite gray is catching the raised surfaces and adding to the musculature. And that makes up this step. So just a quick dry brush. So the next step for step number 5 is that we base coat pretty much all of the cloth as well as wrappings and cording on all the miniatures. The color I decided to use for this was bright blue by Apple Barrel Paints. Once again, runs you about 50 cents, and basically just do 2 coats basically on all the cording. So they have like wrappings around their forearms, around the grips of their weapons. They also have it on their loincloths as well as the fabric that they use to clothe themselves, and I painted all that into a nice bright blue. And the reason why I decided to use this color is because, like I said before, my friend Lady Dama wants to use these miniatures for her Norse Warband that she's using for her Mordheim campaign, and she's using the Untamed Beast miniatures that we use for Warcry, and she's using those for Marauders, and a lot of those guys have this bright blue for all their clothing, so we want to make sure that these miniatures blend in with the other group, and so that's the reason why we did that. So once again, you will need to do 2 thin coats of bright blue, and the white background really helps it to pop, and it also adds some accenting colors to the miniature as well. Makes a really nice vibrancy because the blue complements the brown very nicely on these miniatures. And of course, you do exactly the same thing to any cording and wrapping that's on the Warhound as well. Alright, so from there we go to step 6, which is another base coat again. You're once again just painting all the leather pieces this time. So things like the boots, the straps, the pieces of leather, the cloak that's on the Godsworn humans. I used Burnt Umber by Apple Barrel Paints in order to do that. And then I decided to use Territorial Beige on the little Warhound. And the reason why is just because I thought that the brown would just be too much darkness on the Warhound. I wanted a little bit more of an accent color, so I used the Territorial Beige for him. So he's got like this little leather harness around his chest and his back, so I used the Territorial Beige for that. And as you can see, I just kind of picked out all those details real quick with Burnt Umber. Burnt Umber, I actually used 3 coats on that one, if I'm perfectly honest. I used the 3 coats on the cloak for the leader of the warband, the sorceress there in the back. And the reason why is because it's covering a large area, and I really wanted a rich brown color for that cloak, so I spent 3 coats on that. But everything else, though, is pretty much 2 coats for the boots and the straps and things that they have on the miniatures. Now, there is quite a bit of straps and belts on these guys, so make sure you catch them all, and make sure you get the 2 thin coats on that part. And then from there, of course, moving on to another dry brush. Alright, so that takes directly to step number 7, and that's a dry brush. And this is for the humans primarily, not so much the Warhound. The Warhound we skip on this one. And once again, I use Territorial Beige in order to act as the dry brushing agent that I use for all the leather we just got done painting with the Burnt Umber. So for the straps and the boots and things, as well as the cloak, as you can see, it catches like the folds of the fabric on the cloak. It adds some depth as well as some highlighting to your miniatures as well. Real easy way to doing that. You just need to be a little bit careful when you do the straps, though, going across the bodies that go across the blue, because if some of this Territorial Beige does rub off on the blue, it's really simple. You just paint it over again with some light blue and you're perfectly fine. If it gets on the skin tones, don't worry about it, because the dark color skin tone that we're rocking on these miniatures will help kind of blend in with the Territorial Beige that you're using for your highlighting. So it makes it really, really simple. And so that's all you need to do. Just do a once over real quick with Territorial Beige, and then you're ready to move on. Alright, so step number 8, of course, is a base coat, and this time we're using a lot of the weapons as well as the claws and teeth of the Warhound, and also all the bone elements that are on the Godsworn Hunt humans on this one. So all we do, of course, is just use Khaki by Apple Barrel Paint. It's a nice bone color. Just put 2 thin coats on anything that you wanted to be painted up with bones. So like the spikes, the spines, the weapons, the blades of the weapons, if you want to use it for this one. Like I said, these guys are going to be intermixed with a Untamed Beasts Warband from Warcry to be used in Mordheim. And the Untamed Beasts don't really have any metal weapons for the most part. All the weapons are made out of bone, so we did exactly the same thing with these guys as well. And the nice thing about the Godsworn Hunt Warband is that their weapons look like it could be made out of metal, or it could look like it could be made out of bone, depending on how you paint it. And so because of that, we use the Khaki in order to do that. So you can see that the 2 barbarians there in the background, one guy's got a huge double-handed sword that curves, the other guy has a huge double-headed axe. You paint that bone color, it looks like they just took a big giant piece of bone and sharpened it up for the most part. Same thing with the bow and arrow guy as well as the javelin person on the right-hand side. So it ends up working out pretty good. At the same time, I also use the Khaki color for the fangs as well as the claws of the Warhound, and then you just do 2 thin coats of that and you're ready to move on. So the next step, of course, is to do a base coat as well as a dry brush. This time I used the granite gray is what we ended up using for the most part. So what do we mean by that part? So what you gotta do is you gotta look for all the fur that's located on these guys. So a lot of these guys have a lot of fur around their boots especially. And so because that, we just put a thin coat of granite gray on that just to make it look a little bit of a lighter gray. So that way it looks kind of cool at the same time. At the same time, if you want to use the dry brushing, I used a little bit more of the granite gray on the dry brushing for the Warhound. I just didn't think it was bright enough, so I just kind of did a little bit of dusting on that guy just to make him look a little bit more brighter on that part as well. And that's all you really got to do. So find all the fur that's on your human miniatures, just paint it over once or twice with the granite gray, and then you're set to go. So when it comes to step number 10, we're doing another base coat again, and this time it's all on the hair is where we're primarily focusing on for the most of the humans. So as you can see here, I kind of went with this bright kind of color scheme for all the hair on these guys, and the reason why is because for the Untamed Beast Warband that we use in our Warcry battle reports, I decided to do exactly the same thing with the Hunters, the Planesrunners I believe is what they're called. They're the smaller members of the Warband. We gave them all brightly colored hairdos, so we decided to kind of carry on the tradition for these guys as well. So as you can see here, I used a variety of colors. We used Tahitian blue, used that for the guy who's carrying the giant sword. Basically did his little faux hawk thing in Tahitian blue on that guy. For the guy carrying the huge double-headed war axe, we use winter green by Apple Barrel to take off the tufts on his helmet. For the archer, we use true red by Anita's acrylic paint for him because he's got like this little mohawk thing going on. Gave him a bright red color for that. We used kiwi for all the different spines as well as boils and pustules that's on the flank of the Warhound. The Warhound has actually a lot of like spines and stuff and mutations on his body, so we just used the kiwi in order to pick that out as well. We also used Tahitian blue to pick out the eyes on the Warhound and make it look like it's got a glowing eye effect as well. And we also use the Tahitian blue exactly the same thing with the eye that's coming out of the palm of the leader of the warband, as well as for the eye of the little bird skull thing on her staff, on her scepter. We use that as well. And then of course we use candy pink for the javelin thrower, so that way it makes it look like she's all like bright pink with that one for her hair. And then finally we use ripe tomato for the leader of the warband to give her kind of like this orangey, fiery red color for her hairdo as well. And that's all we did, just a really simple base coat with all these colors on the various Godsworn hunters. If you want to use something else, that's perfectly fine. It's up to you. I just like bright bold color in my warbands, so that's exactly what I decided to do for that. So now that we're done with all the colors, now it's time for us to add the metallics. So for step number 11, it's pretty simple. We just find all the pieces that are going to be silver on these miniatures, and we paint them with Gunmetal Gray by Folk Art. Gunmetal Gray comes in a 2-ounce tube. It runs you about 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. I like using it because it's a nice dark gunmetal color, and I use it for all the armor pieces. So for example, the shoulder pads on some of these guys, they have pauldrons protecting their shoulders. Painted those up, hilt of the weapons, as well as the grips for the weapons. Some of them have like blades as well. Like for example, the Javelinier, she has a like a pilum looking type of tip on her javelin, so I painted that silver as well. Plus any buckles, any chains that are on these miniatures as well. Like for example, the scale mail that's on the loincloth of the leader, painted that in a silver color as well. So any parts that are silver, buckles, whatever the case may be, just kind of pick them out real quick in Gunmetal Gray. You probably don't need to go further than just one single coat. If you feel kind of uncomfortable with it, you could add 2 coats if you want to, but I found that 1 coat of this stuff did the trick. And the last bit of paint that we did, of course, was on the base coat for all the parts that we wanted to be gold in this one. So I used Pure Gold by Folk Art, and I use it very sparingly throughout the miniatures. There's not very much on these guys. It actually is gold. Things like the buckles on their belts, they have very large buckles on these guys. So to match them up with my Untamed Beast Warband, I did exactly that. In fact, if you look in the background there in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that there's a Heart Eater miniature from the Untamed Beast Warband. I have that guy there to act as a model because I was trying to paint these guys and match that unit. So it's always a good idea to have a miniature that's actually done, so that we can see how it looks. So like I said before, there's not really much gold on these guys besides their buckles. They also have like these like little totems and little like charms that hang off their belts and stuff, so I picked that out in gold as well. Same thing with the helmet of the guy carrying the double-handed war axe. I decided to add a little bit of gold accents to his helmet as well, just to break up the monotony. And then whatever pieces you want gold, just paint it with pure gold real quick. And from there we move on to the base. So when it comes to step number 13, we start working on the base. Now, usually when I paint up a miniature, what I do is I paint the miniature first, then I do an oil wash, then I spray varnish, and then I work on the base is what I usually do. But this time around, though, I decided to work on the base first. That way I can use the oil wash on the base as well. And the reason why is because there's actually quite a bit of sculpted material on the bases on these guys. So there's like grass tufts, there's skulls, rocks, boulders, all kinds of stuff. So because of that, I decided to paint up the base first and then oil wash the entire thing after the base was done being painted. So for the base, for the ground, I want to make it look like these guys are walking across an ashy, kind of burnt out wasteland. So I decided to use Pavement by Apple Barrel Paint. Pavement is actually not black. It's actually a really, really, really dark gray is what it actually is. In this photograph, it looks like it's black, but if you look at it in real life, it's actually a super dark gray. And I like using that more than black because when you use the pavement, it actually kind of helps add some texture as well as you can actually see the differences of the different parts of it, of the miniature, even if you cover the entire thing with pavement. So it's not as difficult to paint or to spot things like you would if you notice a normal black. So that's all I used to do. So I just did 2 coats of pavement over the entirety of the base. Just make it really simple like that. Make sure you cover the entire base system system, because from there you're going to dry brush off from it and add details as you work off of it, off the pavement. And so that's what I did for this step. So now that you're done painting the bases with pavement, the next thing you do, of course, is dry brush the bases. In this case, I use Burnt Sienna by Folkart. Runs you about 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. We already talked about I do the dry brushing technique. You're just going to put a heavy dry brush on the entirety of the base to help kind of pick out the details as well. So you have that nice black base with a burnt sienna dry brush on it. It makes it look like it's very ashy and kind of wastelandy and kind of like Badlands type of. It looks really, really cool by the time you get done with it. So just do a heavy dry brush with burnt sienna to pick out all the details, and then you're ready to move on. And of course, the next step after that is to do another dry brush. This time I used Granite Gray once again by Apple Barrel Paints, and this is to help kind of pick out the highlights on the ground as well. So that way you can see, like you see the individual tufts of grass, you can see the bones, you can see the bits of wood and all kinds of detritus that's all over the bases as well. So that kind of adds a little another layer of highlighting, so that way you can actually see the detail of the bases as well. And so you just do a quick once over with the Granite Gray, and you're ready to move on for your base coat. So the very last thing I did on the bases, of course, was pick out all the details of the skulls, as well as some rocks and some tree trunks and things of that nature. For anything that dealt with the wood, I used Territorial Beige by Apple Barrel Paints to pick out all the logs, as well as tree branches and things. So for example, the leader, the Warband, she stands like on this broken tree branch. I picked that out in Territorial Beige, something like the log that's between the legs of the Warhound, exactly the same thing. And then of course, if there's any skeletons or skulls and stuff, I picked that out in khaki paint from Apple Barrel Paint. Just did 2 layers of that on all the things. So for example, you have like this weird kind of beast thing that's at the feet of the javelin thrower, so that way I just kind of picked that out as well. There's also a giant skull thing that the archer is standing on, so whatever bones are happen to be on the, or skeletal remains that happen to be on the bases, just pick it out in khaki, and then you're ready to move on to your oil wash. So now we move on to step number 17, which is an oil wash. And this oil wash is what actually makes this method so quick, is what it is. The quick paint method, in case you're unfamiliar with it, what you do is you just do a basic layering as well as dry brushing of miniatures, and then what you do is you put an oil wash on of some sort. Most people like to use Army Painter's Strong Tone for their oil wash that they like to use, which is a great product. I mean, it does a wonderful job. The only problem though is that it's expensive. It's $32 a can for that stuff. So because of that, I really don't like using it because it's too expensive, especially when you could use a really cheap can of mid-wax polyshade acrylic polyshades, the Mission Oak color, and that runs you $7. All right, so it's almost like what 20% of the price of a can of Army Painter. So because of that, I like using that the most. What the polyshades does and the oil wash does, it actually kind of helps flatten the image of the miniatures. What it does to flatten all the layers of color that you've had, blend the dry brushing as well as the base coating that you work on. It also creeps directly into all the recesses in the miniature, so as you can see there, it kind of brings out a lot of the detail. Like you see the individual strands of hair, the texturing that's on the bases, it's on the musculature, it's all over the place. And so because of that, it helps kind of bring out a lot of that detail as well. And if you also notice as well, the polyshades also really darkens down the colors that we used. Prior to the oil wash, the miniatures look kind of chalky and very pastel colored, and the reason why is because going forward I knew that the polyshades are going to darken them down, and that's why I use such bright colors on that. So now that I've used the polyshades, it kind of muted those brightness of the colors, help kind of blend everything together, kind of gives a unifying look over the entirety of the miniatures. Now, my suggestion to you, of course, is to wait 24 hours for this stuff to dry as well as cure. You could just go back to painting your miniatures like maybe 2 or 3 hours later if you want to, but if any of this stuff is still wet and you start messing with your miniatures, it can cause a lot of problems. So that's the reason why I recommend waiting 24 hours. My suggestion to you is that you do this the night before, let it dry overnight, throughout the day. Whenever you come back to the evening again to paint these things again, you'll be ready to go. And that's exactly what I decided to do as well, is to oil wash them. I left them overnight and I started working on them the very next day. So now that you, of course, are done with painting up the miniature, I decided to add some varnish to my miniatures. I like to matte finish is what I decided to do. Now, if you like the candy-coated, shiny look of your miniatures, you, of course, could skip this stage if you want to. For me, having that shiny gloss on them kind of throws me off a little bit. So because of that, I use Krylon Matte Finish. I got a can of this stuff for $5 at my local Walmart. I just give it the once over the entire miniature, and as you can see, there just kind of blends the colors together, gets rid of the shine on it, the sheen that's on the miniature, at the same time just brings out all the details. You can see it all looks just really absolutely fantastic. The oil wash has really gone to the details. It also blended the miniature together, flattened the colors. It just looks really awesome by the time you get done with it. And so that's the last kind of step we take before we start working on the bases. Alright, so step number 19, which is the very last step of the process, is that we base the rims around the bases. And so because I just do a base coat on this one, I just use burnt sienna once again by Folk Art, and I use 2 layers of the, sorry not 2 layers, 3 layers of the burnt sienna on this one. So what I did is just paint the rims of the miniatures. Just paint it 1 coat, let it dry, add a 2nd coat, let it dry, and then add a 3rd coat and let it dry. And the reason why I decided to use 3 coats on this one is because some of the polyacrylic that I used from the mission oak leaked onto the edge of the bases, so you could really see it a lot. So because of that, I had to add an additional 3rd coat in order to kind of hide those drip marks on that. And that's the only reason why I used 3 coats on it. But as you can see, though, it does a really fantastic job of really tying the entire warband together. And you can see it also kind of blends with the heart eater in the background as well. And with that being said, that pretty much ends your steps for painting up the Godsworn Warband. And with that, here is the end result of the quick cheapskate method we use to paint up our Godsworn Warband. As you can see here, we mixed them in with the miniatures from the Untamed Beast Warband from Warcry, because this is going to be making up the Norse Marauder Warband that my friend Lady Domina is using in our Mordheim campaign. And as you can see, with the method that we use to paint these guys, the colors that we've chosen, they blend in seamlessly with the Untamed Beast Warband. You would actually not think that these guys were like a different faction altogether. They all kind of blend together. It looks really, really well together as well. And it just looks all kinds of awesome. I'm just really happy with the result that kind of came up with this. And as you can see here, it just looks awesome, and we can't wait to see it being played on the battlefield and used in future battle reports as well. So now that you guys have seen how to cheaply as well as quickly paint up some Godsworn Hunt Warband members from Shadespire, let's go and talk about the money cost saving tips that we use between the Citadel method as well as using the cheapskate method. And as always, the very first thing we're going to do, of course, is talk about the paints that Citadel or Wargame from Microsoft Games Workshop would recommend for you to paint these miniatures. We'll talk about the price that would cost, and then we'll show you my cheapskate method and show you the savings that you would generate from that as well. So that being said, let's get the cost saving tips on a roll. Alright, first of all, let's go and talk about the Citadel method. This is the method that Games Workshop will require you to use using their Citadel line of paints in order to paint up all the miniatures with the same technique that we used. First of all, you'll need to buy yourself a can of Corax White Spray. This is the spray that you would use to prime the miniatures. That runs you about $17. From there, you'll need Cygor Brown. The Cygor Brown color is for all the nutmeg that you would use for the skin. That runs you $7.80 as well. For the dry brushing for the flesh tones, you'll need to buy Acadian Flesh Tone. That runs you $4.55. And then for all the parts that we painted in granite gray, you'll need to purchase Ulthuan Gray. That runs you $4.55 as well. Now for all the bright blue that we did for the fabrics and the cording and things, you'll need Teclis Blue, which runs you $4.55 for that. As well as for all the parts that we painted in burnt umber, so like the rims of the bases and the dry brushing, you will need to use what's called, I think it's called Wildwood is what it's called, the contrast paint. That runs you about $7.80 as well. Now for the Territorial Beige portions that we use, you'll need to buy Baylor Brown, which is the $4.55. And for all the khaki portions that we painted, like the bone and stuff, you will need to use Margas Bone, which costs you $4.55 for that one. Now for the hair that we use for the miniatures, for the Wintergreen, you'll need to use Gas Blaster Green. For the Kiwi, you'll need to use Moot Green. For the Candy Pink that we use, you'll have to purchase Fulgrim Pink. And for the Ripe Tomato that we use for the hair, you'll have to buy Troll Slayer Orange. And all those hair colors run you $4.55 per little tub of that stuff. And it's not very much of it to begin with, just to be honest with it. Next from there, for the pavement color that we use for the bases, you would have to use what's called Eshin Gray. That runs you about $4.55 for that. For any parts that we paint up in true red in our miniatures, you'll need to use Mephiston Red, which runs you $4.55 as well. And then for the gray that you need, for just the mid-tone gray, you'll need Slanesh Gray, which runs you $4.55. Now, for the Tahitian Blue that we use for some of the hair, as well as the detail work on our miniatures, you'll need to buy Baharoth Blue, which runs you $4.55. So now that we have all the colors done, let's talk about the metallics next. Next, for the gunmetal as well as the golden portions of the miniatures, you'll need to use Blood Belcher, which runs you $7.80 there, as well as Retributor Armor, which runs you $6.10. And then, of course, you also need to use Doombull Brown for all the parts that we did for the rimming of the bases. Instead of using burnt sienna, that runs you $4.55 as well. Now, if you wanted to use the quick paint method like we use, using oil wash, you would have to use Army Painter Strong Tone, which runs you $32 for that can. And the last thing you do, of course, is spray miniatures down with Munitorium Varnish to get that matte finish, and that runs you $19.50 as well. If you were to buy everything on this list all at one time in order to paint up your miniatures, you're talking about a total investment of $161.40 in order to paint with the Games Workshop Citadel method. So now that you've seen exactly how much it would cost to buy the name brand paints, let's go and talk about the cheapskate method we use to paint these up and the savings you would accrue from that. Alright, so this is my cheapskate method of how you can paint up your miniatures on the cheap. So first of all, the primer we would use is Rust-Oleum Flat White Primer. Runs you $3.99 at your local Walmart. Now for all the colors that we use for all the base coating, a majority of these are made by Apple Barrel Paint. These are 2 fluid ounce tubes that you could buy at Walmart, and they cost you 50 cents a piece. Those colors are Nutmeg Brown, Flesh, Granite Gray, Bright Blue, Burnt Umber, Territorial Beige, Khaki, Winter Green, Kiwi, Candy Pink, Ripe Tomato, and Pavement. And like I said, all those tubes of paint cost you 50 cents at your local Walmart. Really, really cheap on that one. Now for some of the other colors, like for example, True Red as well as the gray that we use, you would then use a tube of Anita's acrylic that runs you 65 cents a tube. You have to get that at your local Hobby Lobby. Same thing with your Delta Sarin Coat, which is the Tahitian blue that we use for the turquoise colors. That runs you 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby as well. Now for the folk art paint, you'll need 3 tubes of folk art. The first one is Gunmetal Gray for all the silver pieces, as well as Pure Gold for all the golden pieces, and that'll run you about 75 cents per tube. And of course, Folk Art Burnt Sienna for all the basing, as well as for the dry brushing, that runs you another 75 cents as well. Now, since we decided to use a quick paint method on this one, you will need to buy a can of Polyshade Satin Finish Mission Oak by Minwax, and that'll run you $6.99, which is opposed to the Army Painter Strong Tone, which runs you $32. And then finally, to get that matte finish on it, you'll need to use Krylon's Matte Finish Spray Varnish. That runs you $5.99. Now, assuming that you purchase everything on the list that I recommend for you guys to paint up this Godsworn Hunt Warband, you're talking about a grand total investment of $27.17 when it's all said and done. So, when you take the $161.40 that Games Workshop and Citadel will charge you for all their products, and you subtract the $27.17 that I would use to purchase things I would purchase to paint my warband, you're talking about a grand total savings of $134.23. In fact, with that $134.23 that you saved, you could probably buy a starter set of some Games Workshop products for miniatures and things. So that is the cheapskate quick paint method that I would use to paint up my Godsworn Warband. In fact, that's exactly the step that I used. So if you guys want to paint up a Godsworn Hunt Warband real quick and you want to use a cheapskate method, this is the recommendation I would make in order to make that happen, and at the same time save $134.23 while we're at it. So that's going to do it for this for you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. You guys' input is valuable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to our channel. That's going to do it for this one, you guys. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out and stay classy.